The Q presents Outside the Box, brought to you by the LCCC Communications Arts Department. On Outside the Box, we debate and discuss the issues that shape the campus community. Now let's meet our host, Layla.
It's March 2020. High schools and colleges across the country are sent home to slow the spread of COVID-19. What started as 2 weeks of lockdown turns into almost 2 years of social distancing, masking in public, limits on travel, and what we're going to be focusing on today, online learning. I'm Lalaj Johnson, and today on Outside the Box, we're going to be discussing the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on student life as we ease back into a sense of normalcy. But before we get into that, let's introduce our guests. We have fellow Comm Art student Bobby Brenner and Joe Armstrong, as well as LCCC's Dr. Janice Wilson Seeley. Thank you all for coming to the show.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Now, Dr. Seeley, you're the chair of Social and Behavioral Sciences. What does that entail?
So that entails a variety of programs. We're very fortunate to have the traditional social science courses, which are psychology, sociology. These are programs in psych, sociology, history. We also have human services program and social work program, a criminal justice program, an early childhood education program, and an education program. So we have a lot of opportunities for students who choose majors in social and behavioral sciences.
Yes, amazing. I know quite a lot of students who are doing the criminal justice. It seems to be very popular
Very
here at
popular.
the school.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. The reason I ask you this is because since we're talking about the pandemic and its effects on student life, have you been monitoring this phenomenon and just keeping up with the trend and how that was progressing?
Absolutely. Well, of course, our faculty had to switch to virtual learning when we shut down the school, and that was an adjustment for faculty who had not done virtual teaching. Also an adjustment for students who hadn't really done virtual learning, and there were a lot of complications. Did students have internet access? Did students have computers that worked? The college was giving out hotspots to students that didn't have their own internet service. So it was a very quick transition, yet in reality, we did not want to lose a whole semester once we knew it was going to be beyond those 2 weeks. So it really did require people to be flexible and on all ends. And there were a lot of hiccups that semester, but things slowly improved.
Yes, so they kind of had no choice but to be on top of it and to get ahead of it if possible.
Yes, absolutely.
When we go back to the start of the pandemic and the sudden shutdown of everything, the distancing, the masking, a lot of people were very scared around that time. Do you think that this has had an emotional impact on students?
Well, absolutely. It was an unexpected, what we might call an adverse event. Individuals in general had no knowledge of what a pandemic was. The last pandemic was in 1918.
Wow.
So to make an adjustment was very difficult. Actually, when you look back, some of the decisions made were the right decisions to be made because it was so contagious and spreading so quickly.
Yes,
I do
think everybody had a sense of, we don't know what's going to happen next. I think a lot of people were scared that we wouldn't survive, perhaps, the pandemic. A lot of people were talking about, oh, this is the last days, we're not going to survive and see another day. And I just think it was a lot of fear around that time.
Yeah.
As students, how did you all feel at the beginning of the pandemic?
I mean, especially since, when it started, it was supposed to be just like a 2-week lockdown, and they extended it another week, 2, and then you see everyone getting shut down, and then it turns into this year-long, almost 2-year-long thing where there's so many regulations and restrictions and everything else. It, as someone who was just starting out in college at that time and then had to move back home, it definitely felt like the world as I knew it was ending.
Did you feel like you had a future as a professional after college? Were you able to think ahead anymore?
At that time, everything was up in the air because like I said, I personally had just started college. I had just moved out, and next thing you know, I'm back home. I'm living back with my parents, and
you're just like, wow.
I'm just like, wow, just everything's back to how it was. Is this the new norm? Is this how it's going to be? And
right. And I imagine for some people that step to college was a big one. It was a big life change, and to kind of get set back to square one probably was a little disheartening for a lot of people trying to start their college careers and things of that nature. Joe, as a student, what were your initial thoughts about the pandemic?
My experience a little different. I used to come here 10 years ago, so it was kind of like a different world. There wasn't as many online courses. I wasn't a student during the lockdowns, but my experience of when it initially happened was, like he said, the 2-week curve, and you don't really know what to believe. It was a scary time. There was a lot of deaths reported. Some of them, questionable numbers if some of them were from COVID or not. But I was working as an electrician, and when things started shutting down, I was worried about people, just feeding their families and just keeping their lives going. We were all distanced from our families. We were afraid to hug each other. If you had a significant other, you're afraid to just give somebody a kiss because you didn't know what was going on. So initially I was a little freaked out, but I was like an essential worker, so I kept in the workforce. Coming back to college after the pandemic, I could see the difference just in enrollment. At least I don't have any numbers, but it seems like it changed the dynamic of how everybody's learning in school.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's been interesting to see the socialization just on a student level and just how the school operates since then.
It's interesting that you mention about feeling distant from each other. That's, I think, the best way we can describe that is feeling a little isolated from your loved ones. Do you think perhaps, Dr. Seeley, that isolation is a feeling that has persisted even now after the pandemic?
I think that it's still apparent in people's behavior, and again, I think that uncertainty that came with the pandemic, as you two were both saying, no one knowing what does this all mean, how far will this go, and what is your future, is a terrible feeling, and also that feeling of isolation, being cut off. Now, a lot of psychologists will say that one thing that was saving was to have so many social media outlets, to be able to connect with people,
yes.
to, be able to do Zoom meetings and to communicate in that fashion, that helped in terms of people's feelings of isolation.
Yes, and also their livelihoods. I think a lot
Right.
of people were able to keep their jobs.
Right.
Being able to transfer over to the work-at-home model. I know my parents ended up in the home. And going off of the essential worker thing, I was also an essential worker. So there was always this fear that I would bring COVID back to them. So I didn't spend a lot of time in the same room with them because I didn't want them to get sick.
Yeah.
And I think the mask too was another point of feeling like we really couldn't connect with one another and feeling like we had to have this distance. And I know for a lot of the teenagers and the young adults that I were talking to, they expressed that they felt like the mask was a protective barrier so that they didn't have to communicate. Because when you're young, sometimes communication can be difficult. So for them, it was a comfort to not have to talk to people, to be able to be, a little bit distant. Do you think this mentality still pervades even after the pandemic now for young people?
Well, I think there's other reasons beyond the pandemic that we can discuss, but we do know, that rates of mental health issues have increased. I don't know that that's all related to the pandemic. I think a lot of it has to do, and a lot of psychologists will say it's social media, and not necessarily. Social media has benefits, and it also has harmful effects.
Absolutely.
So that's, balancing those things. But I do believe that the mental health status of individuals has diminished because of that pandemic was one major contributor, but there's other contributors
Of
too.
course.
We know across the world, really, loneliness is a major problem, and yet
Yes.
we're so connected. How can we be lonely? I mean,
Right.
but those
I would never.
connections, not having that personal connection,
That
not
face-to-face
seeing
and
people, the
that-
face to face,
that
and
hug. I
yeah,
read
the
somewhere
touch or
that
whatever. Yeah,
hugs,
Well,
like,
that was going to
reduce
be
the
my
heart rate.
question. How has that affected like the online courses when people were doing that? What is like the colleges like? How does that affect the teaching when you're just doing it virtually compared to in the classroom? Because I've never experienced it, so I've been wondering that for like high school, college. What are the challenges with that?
I can speak to that because I've done virtual and I also do asynchronous online classes. At first, that first go round when I was doing virtual, it was very clunky, very uncomfortable. Of course, with anything, the more you practice, the better it becomes. So I have continued doing that because we have some courses that are so low enrolled that the only way we can offer them is by doing it virtually, so that students at other locations, more rural students that don't have the time to come to class can participate when we do it virtually. So I've had experience now doing that, and it depends on the students. I've had classes where students are visible to me on Zoom. That's what I want them to be, and I do struggle with that, and I know other instructors do. I don't like it when they're not present, and they make that choice, and it's hard to force people to be present, but that's what's important because it's the engagement part of it. It's just
Right.
like with students that don't come to class on a regular basis. We have when students are absent, it's harder to engage then if you don't
Yes.
see those students. So that's an uncomfortable feeling, teaching to squares with
Right.
nobody in them, right?
Yeah.
So
And it seems students are a little bit reluctant to use I know on Blackboard, we have that live class format. No one really wants to use the mic. No one really wants to use the camera.
Right.
I think everybody is just kind of comfortable, kind of like with the mask. Like, if we hid behind the mask and now we can kind of hide behind the screen sort of thing. I think for some people it is just more comfortable. But I don't really think that it's the most beneficial to learning and getting
Right.
the full experience of what, the college experience should be.
Right.
As students, do you feel more comfortable behind the screen, or?
I mean, taking a course that's like completely asynchronous, that's like you're only, like you don't have much interaction with your professor aside from a few announcements every week and finishing assignments and stuff. That's a completely different experience than what was happening a lot during the pandemic,
Right.
which was these kind of Zoom-based classes where where we were trying to kind of replicate what a normal physical classroom would be, but just over Zoom. So you're seeing your classmates, you're seeing your teachers, but it's on a screen.
Right.
And you kind of have that option of, are you showing your face? Are you turning on your mic? But those are like two completely different experiences in my mind, because I would say the Zoom version of those online courses is definitely a lot more similar to a in-person course, where you do have that interaction. You do, and I think that you do have a better class experience when you have those kind of interactions with your fellow students and with your teachers,
Yes.
than just reading an announcement every week and doing a couple assignments and turning them in every week.
Yes. I think that async really only works for people that are self-motivated.
Well, I was just going to say, it depends on, you can't make blanket statements of what's appropriate for all people, right?
Right.
So for some people, as I said, I do async classes, and by and large, these are individuals that have families, they're working, and they're going to school.
Right.
Coming to class, traveling to class, making arrangements for children is very difficult. And I agree with you about the announcements. It's not as engaging, but I also know from my own teaching that I always have the opportunity for office hours, virtual office hours. I'm always available, and yet few students reach, again, that engagement, that partnership will reach out to me during my office hours or, you know, contact me, and I'm more than willing to do that. But they'd say that they don't have the time, and that's the nature of the online population that do it asynchronous. It's a different type of population.
Right.
Oftentimes an older population that you say, that self-motivation makes a big difference, right?
Yes.
Students that haven't had those experiences, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's an appropriate experience. I think you need that classroom experience.
Agreed.
To understand, yeah.
I would bounce off of what both of you guys said. So how do you think that affected people with more like a hands-on thing, maybe like one of the trade programs or something like the TV studio where you couldn't get that hands-on experience that could have harmed those curriculums, where if you're taking English where it's mostly writing, you could do a lot of that from home. You might actually be more comfortable doing that, because so it's like I could see the comparisons of certain ones might have excelled, some of them might have declined in execution.
Yeah, that's perfect. It depends on the content, and as you said, there are some courses that aren't, the best way to deliver them is not online. You know, it's better to have those in-person experiences, and I think a lot of programs try to do that. You know, that we give options to do it different ways. Some virtual, some asynchronous, and then some in person. So I think that's the healthy solution. Then people have a choice, right? Yeah, I agree.
So that is a perfect segue to what I would consider a hybrid model that the college has adopted. Some classes can be in person, some can be, you know, online, async. And do you think that this approach has longevity in how we would just approach the curriculum moving forward? You know, like maybe just instead of having it the way it was, where it was mostly in person, that even if things do go back to normal, we'll just keep this model. Do you think it has longevity?
Yeah, I do, because I think it does help a lot of students that have challenges, sometimes even transportation. I often have students that can't make it to class because they don't have the transportation.
Especially in this area where you don't have access to like the subway and multiple bus routes like the city, you know? It's, the buses run an hour apart, and if you miss it, you miss it. So yes, transportation is a big problem.
It's challenging. So I think having that option is very important. And I know a lot of my instructors, what they'll say to students, if you can't make it to class, I will put on Blackboard Collaborate or Zoom so that you can be involved if you so choose. And that works too. To keep people in the loop, because I don't know that lots of students don't want to miss class, but they have no other options, right? Our students lead complicated lives, right? You know, it's not just I wake up in the morning, I go to school, and I go home and I do all my work.
We're entering
your lives are so much fuller than that.
Yes, exactly.
Especially here at, you know, the community college is a lot different environment than, say, a four-year institution where students, your kind of one obligation is be a student. You know, you're not really you're not really focusing on working or, you know, spending time with your family as much as you should be a student.
Agree.
Where here, people have much fuller lives.
And we come from all different types of backgrounds and circumstances.
Absolutely.
And locations.
And really, the accomplishments that our students do are, I always think, above and beyond, you know, because you're juggling so many different things. It's just amazing to me how successful our students are in doing that, right? So any way we can accommodate, and that's why we need to hear from students. I'm always a big proponent of hearing from students what works best for you, knowing that we can't be all things to all people, but we can make choices, you know, offering hybrid courses or those sorts of things.
This is great discussion, great information, great perspectives. We will cut to a brief commercial here, and we will be back on Outside the Box. Stay tuned. More is coming up on this topic. And we are back on Outside of the Box. We were talking about the pandemic and the effects of socialization on students. online learning versus in-person learning and all the challenges that come with that. Our next topic will be about friendship, socialization outside of the classroom on campus, and social life in clubs and activities outside of the learning setting. So, Dr. Seeley, for a lot of high schoolers and early college students, everyone had to learn to not only adjust their learning style, but how to make friends and maintain their friendships from a distance. Do you think possibly this poses a challenge to returning to the quote-unquote traditional way of making friends in person?
I think that's absolutely true, that there will be some difficulties with those transitions. I think it always depends on the individuals. Some individuals, depending on their personality, depending on their lived experience, it's an easier transition. For those that struggle more with feelings of isolation or shyness, that could be a more difficult transition back into classrooms.
Right.
I think it's important that people share those feelings, and I think, we talked a little bit about mental health issues, that people find someone that they can talk to about, when do I feel uncomfortable?
Right.
What can I do? There has been that period, as you said, with the mask. There's been the period where I haven't had those direct contacts. Now we have to sort of reinvent those relationships.
Right.
And truly, as you've said, we think about the importance of those personal relationships. So connecting, especially in the college setting, making new friends. I mean, that's part of the whole learning experience.
Yes.
So
I was very excited to make new friends when I first came on campus, and I found it difficult to approach people because it seemed like everybody was kind of in their own little bubble, and you didn't know how to approach them because of it. As students, what were your experiences in regards to that?
I think, the social aspect of it is needed. Just going in your career, you're going to have to network, you're going to have to go for jobs. It's going to help you in every aspect. And then it also is always good to have friends that have common interests,
Right.
even outside of school. So then you guys are excelling. You got somebody you could talk to. I think, the people that do have like a social issue or even some kind of disorder, if the pandemic was rough on like your mental health, I think reach out to a counselor or
And
a
the school
teacher.
does have
or,
many
Yes.
great counselors.
there's a lot of resources to help
Absolutely.
people through those. And
Yes.
once you talk about it and you get a little logistics of stuff, it ends up helping.
Bobby, did you have a hard time making friends in the beginning?
It's very different to make friends based off of a name on like a discussion post or in a box when you're living in your parents' house versus going on a campus where there's normally a lot of people bustling in and out.
Right.
And I think coming out of that experience where you've been trying to make friends based off of a name on a discussion post, I think that definitely kind of maybe not hurt, but maybe stunted how a lot of people kind of would interact normally when you're first coming back into in-person classes and an on-person campus.
Right.
And I think that definitely made kind of like the whole networking and kind of making friends type deal more difficult.
Right. And do you think perhaps this is why, the clubs and the activities were a little bit slow to start? It seems to be picking up now a little bit, but in the beginning, I remember we would have the fairs for the different clubs for the school, and, nobody would really show up. And for me, it was very different than what I expected because I always equated college life with clubs and socializing with people of similar interests and, projects and things like that outside of just what you have to do in the classroom. And I was kind of sad to see that nobody was really doing it. And I was very happy last semester in the spring. It seemed like we had a lot more engagement. So perhaps everybody is starting to remember some forgotten social
Skills and-
skills and intuitions
Yep.
that were on the back burner for a little bit.
I have to say, too, that I've noticed through the years that folks that are in programs such as you're in, that when you're taking a series of classes together, you develop those social connections better than when we have general studies students. That's why we try to urge students to find a particular major, because
Yes.
general studies major, so when I teach general psychology, I have students from all different majors. And oftentimes what happens is students will come into a class and they don't interact with each other, which really bothers me. Now I do an icebreaker, so I force people to talk to the person next to them or make connections with other folks, because that's my background in psychology and I know the
Right.
importance of that, right? But that makes a difference then when people feel a little bit more connected to each other. But it is a lot harder when you don't have sort of those cohorts that are seeing each other in different classes, and you can talk to Joe and Bobby and talk
Right.
about your courses, where you have someone taking a general psych class at 9 o'clock in the morning. They may be off campus then until the next day, and they're not
Right.
with the same people. So it is a very important thing that clubs allow us to do that. And I think, as you've said, I've noticed, I know even with our psych club, because we do have a psych club
Oh, nice.
and history club, that membership has improved greatly. And so that's very important. And all you need is a core of people in these clubs to then branch out and bring other people in. So
Exactly.
that's really important. But I think that has picked up. There had been that delay in, I don't know if it was coming together. People
Right.
didn't want to be in another room with other people and feeling more comfortable now with
Yes.
moving into other rooms.
So, with that being said, do you think the outlook is a positive one, just generally, across society in general? Do you think that in the future we're headed to a more positive place overall with like just getting back to normal?
I think it's opened doors for other options that we wouldn't have considered if it hadn't been the pandemic. You know, we are embracing students that would not pursue education because they couldn't make it to that set schedule. So I think that, you know, what we have to do is take the positives with the negatives, and we have to weigh what's most important. But it does provide, we have to look at it that there's challenges and opportunities, and what ways we can improve on our opportunities.
Right. So
Yeah.
would you say there are some positives that did come out of the pandemic that we should, embrace and, like just take the good basically out of what wasn't such a great situation to begin with? Is that like something that
Yeah.
you think would be easier to do moving forward?
Well, I think it helps people to see how flexible we can be in short periods of time. I don't know about you folks. One thing I want to ask you, those of you who use Blackboard Learn, I think, in the past it was only used for online courses, right? But now most faculty are using Blackboard Learn as a way to communicate. You can find the syllabus there. You can, post notes, PowerPoints. So I think that it's a good thing that now more people use the course management. I don't know, I have to ask you folks that, but it makes it easier to manage. That's part of being a good student.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Say you do miss a class like you said, or there was a certain class that you were struggling with. If they record it, you could go back and watch it
Right.
and get it till you get it right.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Say something happened to your car and it was recorded, and you can just listen to it. That's something that we didn't think to do. So,
Yeah, that was definitely a plus on my end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
you all
just-
agree that there are some positives that came out of the pandemic?
And just online learning in general has definitely improved a lot because of the pandemic. Because I've taken online courses before the pandemic, and not to say that there wasn't much effort put into them, at least the ones that I've taken, but they definitely followed kind of a formula, like I've said before, like a asynchronous type formula, where you're direct, rather than a professor teaching you directly, they're more like showing you a thing in a textbook or videos that they've collected, and then you're doing an assignment. Where I noticed that online courses, even since then, even asynchronous ones, definitely have a lot more effort put into them and have a lot more interesting use of materials to kind of get a better learning experience than just, here's the material, read this, do the assignment.
Right.
It's a lot more engaging now, and I think that's a lot because of the pandemic, because the entire country kind of had to go through this, where everyone had to learn how to teach online.
Right.
Good
And how
point.
to maybe tap into a learning style that they didn't know that they had before.
Right. Yeah, very good
Maybe
point.
that extra downtime had some benefits just to get people to slow down for a second and kind of polish their skills, almost like a hard reset. I seen you had
Yeah.
it written down. It was like a hard reset.
Right. And I think even with socialization, I think we are more cognizant about that issue of loneliness, that you can have all these devices, you can have artificial intelligence, but still the need for human contact and having in-person opportunities with
Yeah.
won't leave us, and especially the college age, adolescents into 25, 26, even older students. That college experience is so vital to socialization and setting the course for careers. As you've both said, you have to know how to do that, and it's a good place to
Absolutely.
practice.
Indeed. And as a behavioral scientist, Dr. Seeley, do you have any final advice for students in regards to mental health and how to be in a healthy place?
So my advice would be, if you're not feeling that things are right in terms of your own mental health, and to take time to reflect. Joe, you said that, people needing
Yeah.
time. Take time to reflect, to make sure that you're healthy, and if you're not, seek help. I mean, that's the most important thing. I think one of the things that we've seen too is that people are more likely to identify mental health issues now because some of that stigma, I mean, I'm old, so I know when people were stigmatized. If you
Yeah,
said
there
you
is a
were
stigma with
depressed,
certain stuff.
yes, if you said you were depressed or that you were anxious, that it was as if that was your lifelong trajectory,
Yeah.
rather than seek help.
And get to a better
Yeah,
place.
it was almost
Get to a
taboo
better place.
instead
It
of
was like-
working on the issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that you couldn't, if you were experiencing depression or anxiety, that you couldn't function.
Right.
Well, that's totally not
Incorrect.
true.
Absolutely.
It's if you break an arm, you seek help. If you're not feeling right, talk with someone. And there are teachers, as you all pointed out, there's teachers,
Yeah.
there's counselors, and peer support is very important. So, I know we have programs on campus that try to develop peers as well to help each
Peer
other.
mentoring,
So
right?
it's very important. Yeah. Are you involved with that?
They've asked me many times.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have the time. I wish
Yeah.
I did. If
She's
you all have
doing
the
it in
time,
her own way.
Yeah, in
consider
their
it.
own way, right? The peer mentoring, right? All of you, all three of you are doing that peer mentoring. But that's really helpful. And I know we say it's hard for some people to reach out to others, but if
Being
we
a
as
guy, a lot of guys are like that.
right,
Yeah.
but we as individuals, if we can be the catalyst, the reaching out, the smiling at people, hey, how are you doing? That can make a difference
Yeah.
to somebody, and to recognize that. So, and it's a good environment to do that in. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seeley, for coming to the show. Thank you, Joe and Bobby. I really enjoyed this episode today. I think
Yeah,
we
good
covered some
discussion.
really important topics that we should talk about more as students, and bridge that gap. Well, that is the end of this episode of Outside the Box, presented to you by theCUBE. Join us next episode where we'll have the facts and the opinions right here on this show. Thank you, and join us again soon.